Hello, and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we will begin our discussion on Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This episode, we will focus on an overview of the novel, dealing with the major themes, setting, characters, and connections we made.
It's been a while, huh?
Yeah, it has been, right? It's been, I think, 2 months or something like that, maybe, or a month and a half. But it's been one of those years, right? So first, we hope our listeners are doing well. It looks like there's finally some light at the end of this dark tunnel with those vaccines that look to be effective. And so we apologize to our listeners for missing out on not releasing some episodes earlier. But I hope you all can understand. And we'll be posting then some of these to catch up to where we are. We left off with a Gothic novel, appropriately named Mexican Gothic, which has gotten a lot of buzz and attention. And it's by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And so we have a lot to talk about in this first episode. But first, maybe we could talk a little bit about the writer and the publisher too.
Sounds great.
So what do we know about Silvia that we should tell readers? Is this her first rodeo with novels?
No.
Not right.
So she has a few other novels. And she's also the writer of Gods of Jade and Shadow.
Yeah, so that's one that before this one, I think a speculative work that got a lot of attention. And I know some colleagues myself who are high school teachers who are actually teaching that. I know in part because they were raising funds because unfortunately schools are so underfunded these days that teachers have to buy the books themselves for the students. The other cool thing is beyond this novel, she's also got some other novels that are coming up. So on her Goodreads page, we find out that she's got a novel called Dangerous Eagerness, which is a noir, also set in Mexico, but a couple of decades later in the 70s, set to be released next year. And then she's re-releasing a couple of her other works, her vampire novel and a romance novel, Certain Dark Things, and then the romance novel called The Beautiful Ones. So she's got a lot of works, in other words, that are already on the horizon for next year. So, I think all of us, it's safe to say that we have a lot to look forward to in 2021.
Yeah, this is my first time reading anything of hers, but I'm definitely interested in reading. Definitely the Gods of Jade and Shadow seems fascinating. But as we've discussed in the past, one of the joys of teaching living authors is, I guess, being able to see their interactions. And so following her on Twitter and pretty much any news related to, for example, Mexican Gothic. One of the things that we can touch on a little bit this episode is how it's going to be adapted into film, and that'd be a fun speculative discussion. But I think also you mentioned Goodreads. I think it's a glimpse into her process. She's a good researcher, and that's something I always really appreciate in a writer and an author. When they especially if you're doing something maybe more historical, I think it's obviously going to be necessary, right? If you're writing this story. And so the annotations that she provided for this book, I think are so great. She mentions different books and authors and research that went into various aspects of putting this novel together. And so as far as the author goes, I just wanted to mention that, and the beauty of again reading being able to connect with living authors. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more from her, and definitely like what she's doing with the genres, right?
Yeah, I think I was reading about her background, and she, like you mentioned, it makes sense. She's got a degree in science. One of her degrees is in science and technology, and it really does come through in this one. I think that attention to detail, like you said, and uh, her desire to have some veracity there, right? The verisimilitude of the science of the time definitely reaps its benefits. And so I think that might be the first writer that we've covered who has that kind of science background that I can remember now, actually.
It seems to be. I think so.
Mm-hmm. Because Maurice, he was also one, but he had a law degree, right? He was a lawyer, I think, right? But everyone else kind of cut their teeth in writing and MFAs. And so this is published by De Rey, which is also the first time that we've covered a book from out of them. They're an imprint of Penguin, but Penguin being so big, we've of course covered several Penguin books already. But for De Rey, it is our first. And this book really took off, I think, last not last year, but earlier this year, right? And I think that, as you mentioned, it's going to be adapted, and I think it's already in several printings, if I'm not mistaken. But it really did get a lot of attention, and I think part of it is because of the cover. So even before digging into the book, we've had a lot of beautiful covers in our podcasts. What do y'all think of this cover as compared to the other ones?
I really like this one just because of the colors, the way that they stand out, especially the green, which is seen a lot throughout the novel.
Yeah, that floral pattern wallpaper in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of the books we've covered have this semester have fascinating, engaging covers. This one's obviously no exception. It's very, very appealing. It's vibrant, colorful, and it does kind of have an air of a mystery. I think it connects, without diving into the book itself just yet. I think it does have this almost Victorian / Gothic feel to it.
I mean, like you imply, it brings up that Victorian age, right, of women dressing that way, and of course we'll get into the book, in terms of its class discussion, right? But yeah, definitely for me personally, it's in my top 3 covers. I won't say what the other ones are,
Go.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to leave out anyone, but I love other covers. But my point is, I think more that it makes me really miss, going to the library, going to the bookstore, and just seeing the shelves of different covers, right? And we've talked a lot about this in our podcast, right? Of like, that's kind of the first thing that draws you to a book a lot of times. And I think it's, maybe more so for me and you, Richie, since we didn't really grow up with the internet when we were little. And, in the sense that, whatever school you went to, right, the library was there and you would just see the covers, and especially kids' books, right? Like the covers are really colory and ostentatious.
They're intended to lure you in, like, oh, this looks interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like anything, right? Like cereal boxes and candy, like yeah. The marketing behind books and book covers is a fascinating one. But I mean, the artist just did such a great job. It's like a beautiful oil painting,
Mm,
right? And I think that's
Mm,
also the other
mhm.
thing. There's something very, I'm drawn to it.
mhm.
It's alluring.
And Vanessa, I know you have an interest in publishing, and now that your studies at university are almost done, right? Just like knowing me here, um, I was wondering if you yourself had an interest in like uh, I know you've worked with Chrysalis, right? And Chrysalis is the El Paso Community College journal magazine. But I was wondering if you yourself had an interest in like art design and graphic design of books.
I do love looking at it, but I don't think I have the skill to like do anything with that, like in that area of publishing.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's definitely underrated, and I think nowadays with the cool thing about the internet, though, I don't know if y'all have seen, right, but like with Kali's book, someone made a cake, they made art, all kinds of art,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's the same true of this one. I do want to thank the writer here. Um, she sent this postcard for free for like people who submitted their address and stuff. So thank you, Silvia, for this one. It's really appreciated. One of the many forms of reconnect to literature.
It's a nice little cartoon of High Place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Her wandering the foresty area. Cool. That's another aspect, right? Too, of being able to interact with authors online and getting cool free stuff sent your way. So, and seeing fan art and all, like, I think the way fans interact with authors is cool to see.
And I'm wondering, even if by chance, since you two went to the AWP, if y'all by chance recall if Sylvia was there. I mean, I don't think the book was out yet, but um, if you remember her name on the program or anything.
I can't recall. It was so chaotic
No, yeah,
that
I don't remember.
between just kind of being like depressed that so much of it was canceled. I can't recall
Yeah.
made it or not. But I'm now I gotta go look for the catalog and see just out of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
You might have it around here somewhere.
Yeah, because this book came out like in August or September, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Okay.
you had the urge to say like last year. It feels like that kind of year, right?
It does.
Beginning of it's 2020, right? Release, and it almost feels like that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Um, well, so getting into the book, as you told our listeners in the intro, there won't be any spoilers this episode. But we have a lot of characters to cover, and I think maybe that's what we should start with, just so readers can get an idea of who the characters are. Um,
Mhm.
so let's start with our protagonist. So easy enough. So we have Noemi Taboada, who's the character in the cover, and how would you all describe her? What is it that we know about her that readers should know that isn't a spoiler?
Well, I think first you kind of mentioned it or alluded to it, but I don't know if it was like clear. But this is set in the 50s.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
I haven't talked about that.
yeah. So I think
Mm.
that does play a little bit of a role in her character. I think, but she's more high class family in Mexico City. Her family's wealthier, but so I guess the way she's described in a lot of the media is she's like a debutante,
Mhm.
like a socialite. Kind of one of her roles is to like mingle in the high class society. But I don't know, Vanessa, what you got?
I think she's like a lot of the female characters that we've dealt with, that she's not really accepting of being told no. So she likes to go find out things for herself and doesn't really let anyone stop her from doing that.
Yeah, and I think that is also kind of her. She's so intellectually curious that it kind of that's part of the reason why in her university studies, right, we were talking pre-show that she's like changed her degrees multiple times, right?
Mhm.
So what is it that she was studying and that she's studying now?
I don't think it mentions what she was studying prior, but throughout the duration of the novel, she's majoring in anthropology.
Anthropology. No, yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, like it mentioned theater. She was into theater. Unless I'm confusing her with Catalina, but I think it's not a big theme in the novel by any means, but I think it is important to show that it's not the worst thing in the world to change your majors, and and if anything, it kind of shows that you're really deepening your investment in academia, and that academia just kind of pigeonholes you sometimes when perhaps you should have a more multidisciplinary outlook on things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree, and that's the word that flashed across my head too when first thinking about it. She has this curiosity to her, even in this as the events unfold in the novel, the way in which she kind of throws herself into, you know, a path, an adventure toward discovery. I think is very endearing. It's fun to experience this journey with her in that sense. Even so she's got this strength to her for sure. And a confidence, I think, too. She has this confidence, and a lot of it too is manifests in, I think, her she has this sense of fashion too, where she builds herself up. That kind of fun to read throughout.
What else about her? Maybe about her upbringing, her relationship, or relationships, I should say, with her family. And where did she grow up?
Mexico City.
So at the time, and again, well, not again, but this is a little bit before our time. But what I know about Mexico City in the 50s is like it was experiencing like this kind of renaissance of culture in film. There was the golden age of cinema for Mexico. Um, I think there was a kind of explosion of music, that was emerging, in part because there was access to mass media and radio and that sort of thing, and so I think Mexico City represents like the prototypical metropolis, right? But so she kind of emerges from that and goes into this small town. I think if I remember correctly, she went to Catholic school, so she's got like that kind of Catholic upbringing that is somewhat influential, for better or worse.
That's right. It does mention her and the nuns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then Vanessa, you were saying about her family.
Oh, yeah. So she leaves Mexico City to go, I guess, investigate what's happening with her cousin,
Mm-hmm.
Catalina.
Mm-hmm. And we won't spoil what exactly is going on, right? But compared to Noemi, how would you all describe Catalina?
How would you?
It's kind of a little hard to.
Yeah, how would you describe Catalina?
Put me on the spot.
Oh, how the turntables.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to call her submissive, but at the same time, she's not really giving into anything. She's trying to fight it. So as much as I think she's very cautious, and I think strategic in the way that she's doing things. But she comes off as submissive to, I think, to a lot of the other characters.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I think worth mentioning about Catalina is that when we see her, she's undergoing a character change. Like you say, there's a perception, but I think it is through the eyes and memories of Noemi that we see a different type of Catalina. She's like
Mhm.
she doesn't remember her this way,
Mhm.
so she
Mhm.
knows that there's something uh, happening here.
Right. And we can tell the readers that, unlike Noemi, Catalina is married, right? And so there's kind of that theme of like how marriage changes you, you know, and so I think part of it we could just say there's that, right? It's like there's a big emphasis on like how, because she is, like you said, submissive and to some degree, to the husband here, Virgil. Uh, it's like she's a totally different person in many ways.
I mean, I guess that does happen in real life. I guess like sometimes people are really close to each other, but maybe they do get married and enter a relationship, and just it's not necessarily a negative thing, but it does cause people to drift apart a little bit. And
Mhm.
so you see that, because I think that's one of the things that Noemi is kind of troubled by, is that at one point they were really, really close. And
Mhm.
once she does marry this guy, I think they just don't talk as often.
Mhm.
They don't
Mhm.
communicate.
Yeah.
And so getting into the husband here and in his side of the family, right? What can we say about them?
I think they're very set in their ways. They have a certain way that they'd like to do things, and they're not going to be told that it's wrong or that they should try to do it a different way. Mm.
Vampires. No, I'm just kidding. No, like that was my first impression being introduced to the family. Is that, like you were saying, Vanessa, is that they're kind of they're used to their ways. They're very set.
Mhm.
And I just think Moreno Garcia's description all throughout is like just constantly being referred to as pale, and like there's this there is an air of mystery around
Mm.
all of
Mhm.
them. That I think, as a reader, there's a certain natural curiosity that makes you want to figure out what's happening at the heart here of this family,
Mhm.
because we you could even say to a sense the setting is a character, right? This high place.
Mhm.
We talk about, I think we've said that before, how place can act as a character. And so yeah, this castle, this kind of mansion that Naomi travels to, has its own name, right? High Place, and there's a personality to it as well. But I don't know if you want to dive
Mm.
into that just yet. But when I think of the family, I think of the house too. That's why.
Mm.
Yeah, I think there's an important ancestry that we get into, and I also see them, just their side of the family, as just like they kind of embody the colonizer, right? If we look at this novel from a post-colonial lens, um, and because of that, you know, um, we can bring up a lot of connections later on, but um, like you mentioned, Vanessa, I think that shows how they want to preserve their own identity, and so they have like these rituals, that they practice, like you know, no speaking at dinner, right? And those
Mm.
kinds of things. Um, and so this is where we kind of venture into the Gothic element. Um,
Well, there's a certain coldness, right? Just to kind of expand on that very briefly, because I know you want to dive into that, but the coldness of or more so like the clash, I guess, of Naomi being used to like being the socialite and conversation, and kind of
Mm.
being placed along this family where it's actually kind of Florence who acts as like the in charge, in charge of the house, right? In a way, the matriarch, who, and she's very strict, and that was one of the things you kind of alluded to, but like not talking during dinner, like is kind of something that's a shock for Noemi. And also, I think also mentioning that they're British, right? They've got their kind of ancestry, historical roots and Britishness in this Mexican town.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of reminds me of like the culture clashes. Those of us here at the border, we get a lot of people from all over, right? And especially like at parties, right? Like, when you go to a Mexican party, right? It's like people like Noemi, right? Very outgoing, very friendly, and gregarious. But then you go to some other parties, like on the west side of town, and it's just like a totally different vibe, right? And so there is a kind of commentary here by Silvia, I think, about how Mexican culture, has that kind of vibe to it that the you know the Doyles here simply do not have.
They didn't pass the vibe check.
Well, and no, I mean, before we get into the Gothic element and the themes, so we have Virgil, right?
Mhm.
He's the husband. I mean, I guess to readers we could say he's kind of like the John and Yellow Wallpaper in the sense that he's kind of the man of the house in a way. Um, but you mentioned Florence as well, right? And it's interesting how Florence, as a woman, she takes on this patriarchal role, right? And so there's her. I know you mentioned, Vanessa, that Francis is your favorite character. And so what about him?
So he's more of like a nerdy character. So he's very much focused on his own little space, and he likes to draw, and he likes, I guess, just learning stuff about everything.
Mhm.
And his relation in this whole mix is how he's related to.
He is. Florence? Why am I thinking Florence? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Florence's son.
And he's somewhat youngish, right? He's a little older than Noemi.
I believe
actually.
they're close in age.
Yeah,
she's 22.
Mm-hmm. And then Virgil is like 30, 35, I want to say.
So mid to late 30s.
So. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Besides the family, both families here, we also get some medical characters, right? And being in a pandemic, I think many of us might be tired of listening to doctors at this point. But these are important characters to the story, so they're quite central. So who did we have? So we have Western medicine, right? And then we also have, I think, indigenous culture represented here too. So we have Dr. Cummings, if I'm not mistaken.
Important noting that Cummings is like the family doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So he's involved with the situation.
So he's like their personal doctor, and the family, again, kind of going back to their ways, like they'll only go towards him. And I think even when Naomi wants to go outside for help, they're very resistant to that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the curandera, right, Marta?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And so this is a nice transition, right? Because, we finish with Guadlica Girl. And, if you haven't checked that out, our episodes on that, please do. It's a great work. And, goes deep into curandera culture through poems and art and stories. But we get Marta here as kind of representing, because I think it's easy to stereotype the curandera character, but I think Silvia does a good job of balancing curandera culture with someone who is still grounded in reality. And let me clarify what I mean by that. So so to be clear, what I mean is, you know, I think it's easy to stereotype for writers to stereotype a curandera as someone who like is, like in Western medicine, right? You would think of a witch, right? You would think of someone who is into the dark arts, into black magic or white magic, right? And so, you see it a lot in film, right? Like The Craft, where they're kind of ostracized, and ultimately the magic takes over them, because they're unable to get a hold of it, and they end up using the magic for evil, right? So there's that, but here, I think Marta is represents that kind of matriarchal culture, right? That we have in indigenous communities. Someone who is attentive to people's ailments, and still, you know, just like the curandera última in Bless Me Última by Rodolfo Anaya, is able to say, you know what, you just need a shot of this or whatever, right? So she's not completely closed off, right? She is grounded in curanderismo, but she's still able to say, what, this is something that maybe a doctor, a physician could help you with instead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because when you first made that statement, it's like, well, that is to say she's not going to completely reject like a cure, like a
Mhm.
possibility of, even if it comes from, this maybe
Folk
more
medicine,
academically trained, yeah.
right?
Um, and of course, she's the healer, community healer, and that's such an important role. So that's why ultimately Noemi seeks her out. But we'll dive more into that journey
Hmm.
too. Healers there. Shout out
Yeah,
to all the doctors and healers out there in the world right now.
yeah, especially right now. Um, and so it is kind of interesting in that regard, looking at this novel from the history of medicine, and how medicine has evolved. It's been politicized, because of the pandemic, right? Where, like, people, I think, are going to say that this vaccine is going to make it worse or whatever, and you know, the, so there's, I think, no need to get into that, because I think people are in some ways sick of hearing about that. But um, that kind of takes us a little bit into the themes of this, and just going off the title, right? Mexican Gothic, and I don't know about y'all, but I think, to me, this is the first Gothic novel that I've read that is set in Mexico.
Mhm. I think so.
Yeah.
And because of that, we had already hinted at this, but it brings up the colonial element, which is kind of a real staple of the Gothic tradition. Um, and those who might be unfamiliar with Gothic works, I know you, Vanessa, mentioned pre-show that you have read Castle of Otranto, which happens to be the very first Gothic novel. Um, and so, all of us have read different Gothic works, through our studies. Um, so I was wondering if there were any of those Gothic tropes and motifs and symbols that you all wanted to share from this particular work that you've seen in other works, or even just in this work in and of itself.
Um,
Well, earlier I mentioned the house itself, High Place, and the setting, right? It's a foresty mountain, lots of fog and mist, and of course
Cemetery.
we talked about the cemetery. I have the image pulled up right here that Silvia Moreno-Garcia tweeted, and it's got a creepy element to it. So just that kind of environment, there's a lot in the house, the way it's described. There's no electricity. There's a coldness to it. You talk about the family itself. That's kind of weird or different. They are kind of in a way like outsiders, the way they present themselves, because they haven't really like assimilated the area. They've always kind of kept their distance. And so these are kind of all elements that you can kind of see if you trace a lot of Gothic tradition in literature. You see a lot of these elements. Without going to spoilers, you also just have like these concepts of obviously the supernatural, right? These visions, ghostly visions, and madness, right? And just pretty much there are books that are just straight up like given shout outs in during the time in the novel. Like I guess now Naomi's pretty well read, so she mentions certain novels throughout, like Wuthering Heights is one of them. You have these like Byronic characters. I think Virgil kind of reminds me of this kind of Heathcliff type Byronic character, right? All throughout. So, and you see a lot of, I think, themes in Gothic literature of just like, I think women in general, like, and society, trying to navigate their roles, what was expected of them versus what they want. So I know that's a mouthful, and I don't know if that kind of sparked anything for you to bring up as well, Vanessa.
Well, I think the character of Virgil is an important one, just as in like the sense of being a tyrant, kind of like he's very controlling of the women in the house, especially Noemi and Catalina. I think that's
I think going to the other Gothic tropes that are just popping into my head. I know we mentioned this, the letter, right? It's the letter that she first gets from Catalina, and it kind of just reminds me of like, the tradition of the epistolary novel, right? There's so many, Frankenstein, and so there's that, because it is the 50s. Technology is still kind of in its and still evolving, and but I was really struck by what you said, Richie, about how they're kind of closed off, right, and very, very traditional, Nosferatu kind of thing, right, and literally, right, they're in the high place, so that kind of brings up the discussion of class, right, and I think Silvia does a great job of capturing not just the Gothic atmosphere, which I think is hard enough, because I mentioned pre-show that, the Gothic can be a sensitive school of literature in the sense that, you can kind of overdo it. You can get into campy fiction. You can get really stereotypical, right? But I think she does a good job of being very subtle, being understated, and very Faulknerian to some degree. And at the same time, there's this particular setting in Mexico City, not Mexico City, but the town, right? Of it, it's called the
Triunfo. El Triunfo.
El Triunfo, and which is based on a real town, right? And as you mentioned, she tweeted out that photo. So we appreciate Silvia's, annotating her book and Goodreads. But I think, that's the other part of the Gothic that is so important is, how does class play into this, right? And it kind of takes us back to the Victorian era. But I will say that's something I really loved about this novel is, I was watching this show, Queen's Gambit, in part because I love chess. And one of the things about Queen's Gambit is part of the episode, part of the series is set in Mexico City. And it does a beautiful job of capturing Mexico City, and I think it's the 80s, 70s, whatever it is. You really feel like you're there, and I've never actually been to Mexico City, right? So like even more so. But I think that this book as well, it kind of does a great job of capturing like that small town feel. Right outside of Juarez, there's some small towns, like Creel and such in Chihuahua that reminded me of it. And I think it really shows the author's veracity of like the culture, the history of the place, the traditions, the small town views, and how friendly they are as well. You know, it's not like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, small town.
You mentioned it's interesting. You mentioned the epistolary novel, and you think of Frankenstein. I also think of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which also kind of has that element. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because when I think of like also when I'm reading this and drawing threads, you know, they also I think it's mentioned that they import dirt from their homeland as
Yes.
well, which reminds me of like Nosferatu and Vampire and Dracula stories where they do that as well. I think that's actually like literally something that they do in Nosferatu or Vampire myth where they bring their soul or their dirt over, which obviously as we uncover, there's a little bit of reason behind that, but we'll get into that later. Touching up on the Gothic one last time, I think when you study as a genre, there's certainly an evolution to it, and you know, I think when I was in school and was studying that, one of the things that I noticed is how there's an evolution and an adaptation, and so I always like to talk about what I call like the scientific Gothic, where it's, you know, instead of maybe like the supernatural, there's always like a scientific explanation, and I wrote about this in Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, which they made a movie adaptation. It's a bit different enough where, you know, I think it loses some of the heart of it, but you know, I definitely see some elements of that in here that we can explore as we you know, go over the book. I like kind of this as an addition to the discussion of the Gothic as a genre in literature.
And so maybe that can take us to a discussion of the themes. You know, and again, just trying to avoid. I know it's hard to kind of avoid spoilers here, but what was one of the themes that you had in mind, Vanessa?
I think family and like generations is like a really big one. So you see the relationships between Noemi and her father, and between her and her cousin Catalina. But you also see the relationship between Francis and his mom, Florence. And I guess the relationship between also Virgil and Catalina is one to look at.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the running threads that like it shows, you know, what does family mean, right? And you know, are you willing to do anything for your family, right? Or is there a point where like you'll say this is too much, right? Like, you know, it's like you know, is family does family mean like you're willing to like, you know, help them bury the body that they killed, right? Or is it like, you know, something else? And I think, you know, Sylvia does a really good job of showing us, you know, what family really means between the two. You know, I think by juxtaposing, like you said, you know, Catalina with Noemi, who are like they're cousins, but to me, like they're just really like sisters, right? You know, because they're so close. You know, really reminds me of Sabrina and Karina. And then, you know, you mentioned with you know, the Doyles, right? It's a totally different dynamic, and I think a lot of it is cultural. Even though, you know, Noemi and the Doyles, she's an outsider at first, but because she's also high class, I think there's an element of privilege there. You know, that I think she wouldn't. It would have been even harder, right, if she wasn't, you know, someone who was educated, etc.
Yeah. Well, we do learn that there is a certain aspect of that, of which why the family does accept her, right? Bring her in and welcome her, and again, no spoilers, but Yeah, the Doyles, maybe well not as close as like relationship wise. Like there's a lot of their lineage because I think all throughout their house they have portraits of
Mhm.
their family members
Hmm.
and deceased family members right in the past. So there's a lot about lineage, right? And I don't even think
Mhm.
we mentioned Howard, who's there in the house,
No,
right? Yeah, he's old and frail, but he's there, and
I guess it's
um,
kind of like in the book. He's there the entire time, but he's off to the side, just watching.
Howard Howard Doyle. All right, so themes of family. Yeah, that was well put. I like that connection you made, Jorge. Of what does that mean?
What was another theme, Vanessa, that you had mentioned?
Well, memory plays a big role, I guess, also in terms of family. Mm, so you throughout the novel, you're given a lot of insight through the memories of other characters, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think it will make sense a lot of sense to the readers once they do pick up the book. Hopefully, they can pick it up or the audiobook if there should be an audiobook. Um, but yeah, I think it really puts it in line with the Gothic of like, there's a skeleton in the closet, right? Whether it's real or it's imagined or it's all because of something that they just uncovered, right? So I think that's definitely something there that makes this very much of to me, a slow burner of a novel, which honestly was kind of refreshing,
Mhm.
because I think sometimes novels, they try to hook you, right? Um, and of course, that can work a lot of times, but I think sometimes there's something to say of a novel that slowly but surely, just draws you in, right? Like you're, Moby Dick or something, and you can finally kind of just let yourself be immersed in this world. And that happened to me in this book, and really made me want to explore and ride along in the journey with Naomi. I think there was another theme, right? There was a third one.
Mm, there was one that Richie had mentioned, I
Oh, I
think.
thought you had mentioned it.
Which one?
Yeah, dreams, or I guess more like hallucinations would be a
Hmm.
better way to describe them.
Mhm.
There's a lot of times throughout the novel that you think you see things, but you might not have.
Yeah, I think that the protagonist's grasp of reality, right? We mentioned the supernatural component, but even just outside that, I think because um, it's a new world for her, it's a new place. There's that whole idea of like she's still kind of exploring and wondering whether something that goes bump at the night in the night is really there or not, right? And I think it goes back to what makes this in a gothic novel, and it's not in any way, like I said, it's not in any way what you might think of the gothic in terms of like it be having like cheap scares, right?
Mhm.
Nothing of the sort. It is trying to be in a way like authentic, if that makes sense, right? I mean, it's really bringing you into it's really like traditional gothic in that regard.
There's a lot of psychological aspects to it as well, like you said,
Yes.
questioning of reality, what's
Mhm.
happening and what's not happening, which I think for a lot of people, I don't know, yeah. When looking into the book and researching, I saw a lot of people disappointed, and if you
Hmm.
do, one of the things we talk about it, there is kind of a slow pace to it, and that's
Mhm.
people I think don't expect that, and so they ended up
Mhm.
not liking the book because they think gothic, they think of horror, terror, and
Yeah.
the way the book reads, I think they're disappointed because they're used to cheap scares and tactics and that
Mm-hmm.
thing. Whereas we're dealing with a different kind of terror here, and it's more
Mm-hmm.
subdued, as you said, and there's a lot to be said about that style in the Gothic tradition. Even with that said, it does build up, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I think we talked about the characters, we talked about the themes. Now that we talked about a lot of connections actually pre-show. So what were some of them that really stood out to you outside the Gothic, or with the podcast or film or whatever?
Mm, Well, I made a connection to one of the books that we read earlier this year, Patron Saints of Nothing, just in the sense that Noemi leaves her home in order to investigate what's happening to her cousin, just in the same way that, oh my gosh, what's his name?
June, or was that
Well,
the cousin?
that's the cousin.
Jay.
Hold on. Yes, Jay goes to investigate about June.
We did that last time too.
Mm, yeah.
And there's something exotic about that too, right? Because he goes to the Philippines, and there's an exotic element here. I think Sylvia does a good job of not fetishizing Mexican culture, because I think that's what I mean by that is like, you get films or TV shows where like it really paints Mexico in an extremes. It's either like super violent, because cartels and dangerous, or it's either like, everyone's always drunk and partying, because of like Mexicans always like to party. So I think this book does a very good job of being authentic. I think that's actually a hard thing to do, because it's easy to kind of fall into those stereotypes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other connections?
Well, and I also in the beginning made a connection to Northanger Abbey, just in the sense that that Noemi's leaving and she's going to this big mansion, I guess, and she's trying to figure out like all of the mysteries that are happening within the house. But different from Northanger Abbey, there's actually mysterious things happening at High Place.
Which to me, I haven't read Northanger Abbey, but it reminded me a lot of, and we talked about this, the woman in yellow wallpaper. I think there's a lot of lines where I connected it to it that we can get to, but next time. But it's that theme. It's also within the Gothic tradition of like having the feminine portrayal of a character who isn't submissive, right, but is actually like a very strong character in Noemi. And also, just like the woman in yellow wallpaper, she's upper class aristocrat, but just like you said, trying to find out what's this High Place all about. Is this something that is real, or am I imagining things?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty overt yellow wallpaper references. I think I've underlined parts of the book where it mentions like it's in the walls. What's behind this wallpaper, I think, is how a chapter actually ends. I think she mentions literature, fairy tales, even cinema. I think we talked about. She mentions musicians. Definitely some more pop culture in there.
Well, were there other connections, Vanessa, that you had made to maybe outside of Gothic novels and works of the Gothic, but like movies or um, um, I think you mentioned anthropology.
I mean, just certain little things that she mentions pertaining to like things that she's learned in studying anthropology that I've kind of also learned about. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure I'll find them when we start talking about the book.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is I mean, it's more like, of course, it's pseudoscience, but like, eugenics uh, plays a pretty big role in this novel, and like, it fits right into the Gothic. But it reminded me of, I was talking about this pre-show of Great Gatsby, you know, um, where it's not a big part of that novel, but it is something that they see that, they reference books that are eugenics based. And so just like this one, right, where like, she's seen the books that are there at their library, right? And some of them are like straight up out of, eugenics. And so I think that's important in terms of thinking about, outside of the novel, just thinking about the history of eugenics. It's set in the 50s, so it's right after World War II. But, eugenics, in many ways still is influential, right? And unfortunately, and people who are white supremacists and racist. And, we mentioned that like they're British. And so there's that to take into account. Um,
Yeah, I mean Howard. I think when they're at convo, right? Howard kind of like when he learns that she's studying anthropology, he asks her about Vasconcelos. I think that's a reference to the cosmic race and all that. So it brings up a lot of that research too at that time.
mhm. There's also a lot of movies that reading this book reminded me of. I mentioned a couple, but in different degrees. I'm reminded of Hitchcock's Psycho. Um, I'm reminded a little bit of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that like it's very isolated. I'm reminded of Rosemary's Baby. I'm reminded of The Exorcist. Because in The Exorcist, both in the novel and the film adaptation, you get a character who is being probed, and like science and medicine are being used against her. Um, and so here with Catalina, we have a case of where she is said to have TB, or what they called back then consumption, I think it was. Um, and so there was that. And then I had mentioned to you all that the Haunting of Bly Manor, which is a very recent show, and off the mold of A Haunting of Hill House, the same characters, reminding me a lot about this, and in a lot of ways, both in like the generational, trauma, the way that the family is, but also, of course, the setting and the manner, just very Gothic. I should also mention, because I know you're really into music, Vanessa, since you presented on Tyler the Creator, is that there's Sylvia was cool enough to make like a Spotify playlist. And so I think that's very unique. I think we saw that also with Gali, right? She did one for Sabrina and Karina, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So definitely shows, I think, how 21st century literature is evolving, right? It's becoming a lot more interactive because of how we can see the writer's annotations in real time, instead of having to go to like, some library at the University of Pennsylvania to get access to their annotations. And it's also like we're reading along with the author in a way, right? Because we have their playlist. So I think, as much as the pandemic is stripping us of the opportunities of meeting these writers, we're also finding new ways of connecting with them. Was there something else about the book that y'all wanted to tell readers that we haven't talked about?
You want to mention the series being picked up or to be adapted?
Right. So you said it was Hulu, right? That Hulu picked up, optioned it. Yeah, so I don't know if that's going to be a film or a series, but yeah, I think it would work perfectly as a miniseries.
It's going to be a series.
Cool. One other thing I was thinking of is, and I'm trying to be more mindful of this, is, we have a lot of teachers listening, and professors. So I think this is a very teachable book. And I'm not just saying that because we chose it and because I really love it, but just as someone who teaches works like this, I think it's very well paced. It has a lot of authenticity to it, a lot of the Gothic tradition in it. And I think it's the characters are engrossing enough, that I think students will really dig it. I think it would be like I think in high school even, this could be a good senior class novel, maybe even like a AP English for juniors or whatever, but definitely for college students. Definitely a good work for like a Gothic class, but also like intro to lit.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I think students would really enjoy it. I mean, I don't know. I hope they would.
I mean, I think, we haven't talked about the style, Vanessa, but, since you're currently taking classes and still reading novels, it's been a while since I've read novels for a class, but did you find the style like?
I think it's interesting that it's all in English, even though it's taking place in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But there is like few moments where they do switch to Spanish. I thought it was interesting that in the town when Noemi goes, she's still speaking in English. Like it doesn't indicate that she
switches.
Right. So I'm assuming that she just speaks English, because when they do switch to Spanish, it's not necessarily always written in Spanish, but sometimes it'll indicate it, that they switched to Spanish.
Interesting. That kind of brings to mind, translations. I don't know. I should know this, but I don't know if like this novel is already available in Spanish.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I do wonder in terms of its reception, how this would. I think this would be very well received in Mexico. Not just Mexico City, but like University of Mexico. It mentions UNAM, which is the big university at Mexico City. So I think it kind of like real life. It does go into a little bit of like the way academic culture can be, a little bit, and so that kind of would serve well, in kind of having students in Mexico read about that. So I think we'll hit stop here, but next time for readers, well, you can do an outro for that, Vanessa, and then unless there was anything else you all wanted to say, we'll look forward to getting deep into this book for the first half of it anyway for our next episode.
Thanks for joining us on this opening discussion of Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Join us on our next episode as we dive into the first half of the novel. And if you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylitep.